welcome to another in our series of conversations about career intelligence, especially for cybersecurity professionals. We're glad you're here, and I'm also very happy that we have a special guest, Jeffrey Brown. He is the Chief Information Security Officer for our state, the state of Connecticut. So welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
And Jeffrey has a long history of leadership roles as a Chief Information Security Officer and generally leader in private industry and now in government. So we're very happy to have him in our show here and also in our state. And I know that he has a special interest in communication skills. And I too have long thought that this is a critical skill for people in the cybersecurity profession to develop. And so I wanted to talk to Jeffrey about that and his views of communication skills and the importance they play. So if you're in our master's degree program or any other educational program, you're learning technical skills, you're learning threats, you're learning defenses. But what about communication skills? So Jeffrey, what are your thoughts about the significance of communication skills? And are we talking about written skills, verbal skills, email skills? What's the role of communication skills in a cybersecurity professional, either somebody who's just starting out, just getting into the field? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually think that these kind of soft skills are really critical. And in many cases, these are make or break skills, especially at the senior levels in the organization. What I have personally seen is that there have been some CISOs in the industry that can't talk to the board correctly. That's been a real challenge. I think that's relatively new. So a lot of in the past, like in the 10 years ago, I mean, you didn't really have a CISO in front of the board of directors. That wasn't really a common thing. Now it's not only getting to be common, it's almost in some cases even mandated by, certainly in the financial services industry, there's an expectation that FFIEC would require you to present to the board of directors. And the communication is just required up and down the stack in the organization now. So in the past, when you might have, really been primarily dealing with information technology professionals, now all of a sudden you need to deal with employees, you need to deal with the marketing group, you need to deal with the CEO in some cases, the board of directors, all of the business leaders, and you need to be able to tailor those conversations depending on who you're talking to, and it's going to be very different skill levels. And I mean, I think the board is probably one of the most challenging things, because you have such a variety of people on the board and they like hearing information in different ways. So one of the things I recommend for anybody who ends up in front of the board of directors is to really get to know those board members. I mean, some of them are going to be finance people and they're going to want numbers. Others are going to want more of a high level, kind of just a strategic view, and really being able to tailor that stuff, I think is super, super critical. Regardless of medium, because I know that there's like some thought on like, do I spend more time writing? Do I spend more time speaking? Is it a mix of both? I would say that the most important thing is clarity of message, regardless of the medium. That I think is really something that you need to put some thought into. I think there's a good old Mark Twain quote that kind of said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time, meaning that it's harder to write something that's a little bit smaller and a lot more concise and not so verbose, because you have to really think that through. I would say that it's really kind of critical to, tailor messages to individuals. It's critical to make sure that you're giving them the messages that they want, and also to a degree letting if you're like, let's say in a verbal conversation, with a C-level executive, they don't necessarily want all of the details. Some of them do though. So you kind of let them drive that to a degree. I'll give you an example. If I'm updating somebody about a security incident, sometimes they just want to know what happened, what are we doing about it, what's the impact, et cetera. And that's it. They don't want to know it was a cross-site scripting thing and all of this technical detail that sometimes people just jump right into. Let them tell you if they want that. I think it's really important to kind of factor in what do they want to hear from you.
That's you had a lot of really good advice there. Shorter messages, tailored messages, not too many details. So let's have another scenario. So we have a number of our students are just getting into the cybersecurity field, and not typically, but they might get assigned a technical function, vulnerability scanning or something like that, or pen testing or red teaming. So what thoughts do you have about a new person just getting into the field and doing a more technical hands-on task? How do you start? Who are you communicating with in that case? Obviously, you're communicating with your tech colleagues, but how do you start to hone your communication skills in that kind of an environment? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as you're getting started, just anticipate that you're going to, if you want to grow in your career, you're going to have to be able to present to a variety of different people, both verbal and written. And I do think both are important. Many of us spend a lot of time doing email all day. And even just something like tailoring an email in the right way to get a faster response as opposed to back and forth 6 or 7 times. That's time well spent if you can spend a little bit of time learning how to do that better. I would say also that, learning how to translate technical things to non-technical audiences, and in some cases, kind of having some metaphors, kind of that hand. A lot of people use banks and things like that. It's like, well, if we were robbing a bank versus an online store, things like that. Just be able to bring it down a level to people who need that level of detail, and then bring it up a level to the technical people who sometimes really need to know exactly, if you found a vulnerability in my application, I need to fix that in the code. And the more you can speak their language, the more credibility you're really going to have. If you can kind of talk to the developers in a developing kind of a frame of mind, I think that gives you more credibility, and just as much as so as if you're talking to a senior management, a senior leader, being able to kind of get that to a level where he can understand. And then I would also say one of the other things I think is really important is get to know your business, really get to put things in context. I see also too many people in the industry that are, we've got 30,000 vulnerabilities across 50,000 servers. It's like, well, great. What does that mean? Why should I care about that? Is that normal? Is that a high number, a low number? Being able to kind of translate that to like, hey, 40% of our revenue comes from like this set of servers over here. And by the way, they've got all this critical vulnerabilities on them. Being able to kind of put things in business context really helps you not only, get the issues resolved, but also to get that management support and have them understand like, okay, this is important and we support you in getting that done.
Yeah, that's very good. Another thing I've found in like teaching our capstone security project, we ask students to write up a report or the analysis of what they've done. So I've started to give them examples, let's say, from previous students who are in that class. Here's a really well-written report so they can understand writing. I was wondering, have you relied on like role models or something for written communications or speaking? And is that something that you would suggest, I don't know, on YouTube or some, watching how other people present, or in your company or online, or any thoughts on kind of learning the best practices from other people on writing and emailing and verbal communication?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, I do look up to a lot of different people. I mean, like, Steve Jobs was an amazing presenter. And if you notice, he didn't have a lot of big PowerPoints behind him. He talked, he spoke to the audience. He connected with them in a very interesting way. In terms of writing, I really recommend being very well read. So read a variety of things, and I'm guilty of this too. I read a lot of nonfiction. Sometimes you got to mix it up a little bit, put some fiction in there, some of the great writers. Like anything though, you get better at it by practice. So I actually have a bit of a communications background. I mean, I studied journalism in school. And at the time I wanted to be a writer, and it's kind of ironic because now I sort of am a writer, but it took a long time to get there because I became, sort of this security professional along the way. And really practicing how you do this, like I'll give you an example. I keep a journal, and that's something that's kind of great, especially I'd really recommend that during the pandemic. I mean, this is going to be a really interesting time in history. Capture some of this stuff, just write every day, and it could be free form. This isn't for an audience. But what I've found is that because I do that, and I've done it in a way that's like every day. I hardly ever miss writing in my journal. And, you know, when I really need to crank out like a report or an email or something, I find that it just flows a lot better because I'm just used to doing it. In terms of speaking, I've done a lot of volunteering to, you know, work with Avanta and other kind of industry. You know, every time I have an opportunity to present, in fact, Avanta kind of knows me as sort of a pitch hitter. If somebody didn't show up for their presentation, they usually tap me on the shoulder and say, would you mind getting up there and doing that? And I've gotten that good at this because I've done it for so long and because I've had enough of that kind of practice. So it's not really nerve-wracking for me when somebody just taps me on the shoulder and says, you know, would you mind getting on stage and talking about, you know, which subject? Oh, I'm not even sure, you know, just let me know what the subject is and we'll just do it though. It's like anything, you got to practice to get better.
Yeah, that's very cool. So let's say you were interviewing a new person for your team or now or in the past. So are there communication skills that you would look for, and what kinds of things, you know, would you evaluate them potentially or partly on that, and what things would you look for, and what pointers do you have on people sort of preparing for a first interview with a CISO, either you or at another organization?
Yeah, I think it's an important piece too, because usually the way I kind of look at it is your resume gets you in the door. It kind of shows that you have the skills. Once you're in the door, your resume doesn't matter as much. And it's really more about your personal skills and how you fit the team. And I kind of view it as there's sort of three questions that we want to answer when somebody comes in for an interview. And it's like, can you do the job, which is usually typically your resume? Do you want to do the job, which, believe it or not, sometimes we have had candidates that were, I'm not that interested in this role. And then can we stand to work with you? Out of the three of those is the can we stand to work with you? That is the most critical because we're a team and a lot of security really is very interactive, very team oriented, you know, and having enough of those soft skills to just kind of get along with people and be able to communicate clearly and be able to, you know, not waste people's time with like long meandering stories that are kind of going nowhere without making the point. I mean, in security, we're very, very busy. There's a lot of things that are going on and we have to be very clear about things too, because I mean, sometimes there's very subtle differences in words. And, you know, if you really want to be very clear on that, you have to make sure that you're being technically accurate, you're being concise, you're getting to the point. And that's, you know, ultimately that you're personable enough, but what you don't want to do is have, you know, a security group that really nobody wants to approach, nobody wants to work with because you're just either seen as kind of difficult or just not that approachable, right? So one of the things is to just keep that security group as a very approachable group. You want people to come to you with issues. You want them to be able to say like, you know, I have a problem, I need your help. You don't want to end up being sort of those no people of like, you know, we want to stop, you know, progress from a business initiative or we want to get in the way of what you're doing. We're here to help and partner with you really. And that's what I really look for in a candidate is somebody who can work with our business. You know, security is just so collaborative now that it's really, I think, super critical to make sure that you are, you know, able to interact with people at all different levels of the organization.
Yeah, that's very cool, the collaboration. I think the other point I picked up was just the idea of clarity in communication. So if you're in security and you have some security control or procedure, you better get it right, and number one. And number two, you better make sure people understand it, right? Or they're going to do something else. So I think that's another set of feature of the communication that's maybe super important for security professionals. So very good. Well, thank you. I think all this information is super, super valuable. I hope we can have you on another time and talk more about this because I certainly wholeheartedly agree with you about the importance of this. And do you have any final thoughts for people just getting into the field and related to communications or other kinds of soft skills that you think are critical?
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting time because, you know, back in, you know, 20 years ago, they didn't really have cybersecurity masters or undergrad degrees, anything like that. So really a lot of the CISOs I know come from a variety of backgrounds. I'd really recommend everybody keep a little bit diverse, you know, learn a lot about a lot of different things. Don't just learn about cyber. You know, be well read, be, you know, interested in a lot of different subjects and especially be interested in the business that you work at. Because I think the more you can show interest in that, and the more you can learn about the business that you're supporting, the more you can put security into context. And I think that's really key, because business doesn't understand risks until you really put it in context to what does this mean to my business. And the more you can do that and the more you can communicate that to the higher levels, you will just excel in your career.
Yeah, that's super good advice. Thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. And thank you all for listening, and listen to this podcast again. In the, next week, we're going to have another security thought leader on, and listen to this one a couple times. There's so much good advice in it. So